Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about AncestryDNA test results. So you've spit in a tube, you've waited 6 to 8 weeks, you've got your results, and the question is, now what? What do you do with those results? So we're going to talk about that in two parts. The first part of your AncestryDNA results are your ethnicity estimates. Those are going to be when you log into your AncestryDNA homepage. It's going to be on the left-hand side there. You're going to see an ethnicity estimate. Part 2 of your test results is going to be your DNA matches. We'll talk about the ethnicity estimates in part 1 today, and then we'll talk about the DNA matches in part 2. The specific questions that we're going to answer are, why does my DNA ethnicity differ from my family tree research or our family stories? And then in part 2, we're going to talk about where did all those DNA matches come from and what do you do with them. So let's dive in and talk about the ethnicity estimate. Before we can do that, you need to understand a little bit about how DNA is inherited. So I have a simple example here on the screen that will help explain this. We're going to look across the top line here. You have 2 sets of grandparents, everyone does, and your one set of grandparents are Andrew and Sandra, and your other set of grandparents are Graham and Elaine. Now, each of us get 50% of our DNA from our father and 50% of our DNA from our mother. So conveniently, they each have 6 letters in their name so that they can pass on half of that. So what we're going to see here is that Andrew and Sandra have a child. They each pass on half of their DNA to that child. That DNA gets recombined, and now we have a son named Edward. Over here with Graham and Elaine, they each pass on half of their DNA. That child becomes Angela. Now, Edward and Angela are, for the purposes of this example, your parents. Again, they each pass on 50% of their DNA to you, and you become Glenda. Hopefully you can see how that happens. Now, you have siblings. One of the things you need to understand is that your siblings will not have the exact same DNA that you have. They get 50% from mom and 50% from dad, but they get a random 50% just like you did, and it's not going to be the same 50%. So you can tell that these 3 people are siblings because of the similarities, right? They all have a G, a couple of them have an R, a couple of them have an L, they all have an A, right? So there's enough similarities that we can tell that these 3 people are siblings, but they're not identical twins, and so they do not have identical DNA. Another really important thing to talk about when we talk about DNA inheritance is how things get lost over time. So if you look up here at Andrew, Andrew has this W in his name. He was very careful about passing that W on to Edward. Edward has a W in his name. But you'll notice that none of the children in this 3rd generation here have a W. So that little piece of Andrew that he inherited from somewhere back in his line that he passed on ended with Edward. It did not get passed on to the next generation. And that happens. And so you need to be aware that A, inheritance is random. B, you get 50% of your DNA from dad, 50% of your DNA from mom. And C, siblings are not going to have the same DNA unless they are identical twins. So with that said, let's talk then a little bit about where all that DNA comes from. This is a 10-generation calculation just to kind of help you start to wrap your head around what's going on in your family history. So it starts with you. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. The number doubles with each generation. By the time you get to your 7 times great-grandparents, there are 512 of them. That means just even at 10 generations, there are 512 individuals who each passed on 50% of their DNA to the next generation, and so on and so on and so on until it gets to you, okay? So you have pieces from a lot of people, but it's also possible that by the time you hit third or fourth great grandparents, remember that W, little pieces of DNA have been lost over time until it's possible that you might not, likely don't, have DNA from all 512 of these people. Okay, so once you get your head wrapped around that, then the ethnicity estimates that Ancestry provides are going to make a lot more sense. So here is where this information comes from. Ancestry has a reference panel of individuals currently from 26 regions around the world, and you can see those highlighted there on your screen. Those individuals in those reference panels are people who have documented deep ancestry in that specific location on the lines of all four grandparents. So we can assign them to a region of the world. So we have this reference panel of people. When your DNA comes in, we compare your DNA to this reference panel. And we run that 40 times, and then we provide you with an average of what percentage of your DNA looks like people from each of those 26 regions around the world. So you might come out with varying degrees of ethnicity. So here's a fun little view. I am lucky enough to have both my parents still living, and I am the oldest of 5 siblings. And so I've tested everybody just to get a view of what that looks like. Here you can see my father is 76% British and 8% Irish and 7% Scandinavian. And then he has some other regions, some what we call trace regions. My mother is 43% Irish, 34% British, 16% Western European, and then she has some trace regions. And so you can see here how this breaks out among the children. These two, actually, child number 2 and child number 3, are twins, but they are not identical twins. So they're going to share the same amount of DNA, 50%, as any other set of siblings. So we've got 5 children here, and you can see, though we are all similar, our percentages are a little bit different. What we've inherited is a little different than each other. Now, on the website, here's what that looks like. When you click through to view your ethnicity estimate, you're going to see your estimate over here on the left-hand side. You're going to see the map in the center. Up here in the top corner, you can actually click Help, and you can read detailed information about how this information is calculated. Our science team has written a white paper that goes into a lot of detail. You're welcome to read that. So that for those of you who are a little bit more scientific minded and want to try to dive into that and digest it, it's a really, really informative paper. You can also click on any one of these regions over here, and you'll notice that what's happening over here changes. So we have written up historical information. Our genealogists and our historians on staff here have written these articles based on that particular region. One of the things that I want to point out is that a region is not bound by political or country borders. Those are geopolitical borders, have very little to do with DNA, right? And so you'll see here that even though this region is labeled Great Britain, and it's primarily DNA that is found in England and Scotland and Wales, it can also be found in any one of these other 9 countries. And so you'll see these circles that get larger and larger as different information, the same DNA is spread out across populations. If you scroll down, you'll see some additional information about the reference panel that you were compared to, about how the averages work out. You'll see some information about population histories. You'll see information about migrations over time, and we're talking, 1,000, 2,000 years of time, and how that affects the DNA of a particular region. So all of this is really great information, and again, you can find it by just clicking on any one of these ethnicities to see exactly what some of that history or background is. The other thing I want to point out is that as you click on any one of these ethnicity estimates, you're going to see a range. Remember earlier I said we run this test 40 times, So we compare your DNA to the reference panel in a series of 40 tests. You're going to see the complete range of those tests, and what you're presented here is the average of those 40 tests. So again, that just might help you understand a little bit better about how the ethnicity estimates are created. Now, a few things I just want to make sure that you understand as we wrap up here this portion of this DNA presentation. One is an ethnicity estimate is not a comprehensive view of the identity of all the ancestors you've ever had. Remember, it's only the pieces that you inherited, and you only get 50%, and it's a random 50%. And your dad only got a random 50% from each of his parents, and so on and so on. And so you get these little pieces that filter down through time. So one of the questions we get asked most often is, I know I have Native American ancestry, I have that family story, why don't I have Native American DNA? Well, chances are that great-grandmother that you thought was a full-blooded Native American very likely wasn't. Natives and Europeans have been mixing for a couple of centuries or more, and so the chances of that DNA filtering its way down to you is slim. Now, it does happen, and we do have quite a few people who are discovering Native American ancestry. One of the things we're discovering is that there are sometimes people who didn't have any family story of Native American ancestry, and the DNA is revealing that. So another point is that the DNA can give you insight into your ancestry, but it can also reveal surprises. And so you need to just be open to the fact that just because, all 8 of your great-grandparents came from Prussia or parts of what are now Germany, that doesn't mean that they were German. It could mean that they immigrated to Germany 2 or 3 or 5 generations earlier from somewhere else. It could mean that there have been people migrating in and through that region for centuries, and that DNA became mixed enough that what you expected to find as, I'm 50% German or Western European really isn't the case. It could have Scandinavian mixed in, it could have British mixed in. So keep in mind that there are insights to be gleaned from your DNA ethnicity estimates, but that it can also reveal some surprises, and you just need to recognize that those are interesting facts that you can start to follow in your family tree. So in preparation for the next video in this series, I would encourage you, if you have not already, to start a public family tree on Ancestry. That's going to help you, even if you just start with what you know about yourself and your parents and your grandparents. If your parents are still living, talk to them, find out what they remember about their grandparents. Just build out at least 2 or 3 generations as best you can, and then attach that to your DNA results. That's going to help you in the process. It's also going to help your matches so that you can work together to discover more about your ancestry. If you're unsure if you have a DNA test attached to a public family tree on Ancestry, from your DNA homepage, simply click the Settings button here, and then you'll see under the Family Tree Linking section if your test is linked to, or who your test is linked to and in which tree. So in this case, I'm the one who took the test. I've linked the test to myself in my main family tree that I use for research, and that allows me to use a lot of the tools that are available, and we will talk about those tools in our next video. That's all I have prepared for you for today. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.